In the small town of Santa Mesa, 11-year-old Luna pressed her backpack strap 3 times, a silent signal her late father taught her for desperate moments. Across the street, ex-gang member Cairo froze when he recognized the pattern from an old paper in his wallet. What happened next shocked everyone and exposed a corruption scheme targeting vulnerable families. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more inspiring tales, and comment where you're watching from. The afternoon heat pressed down on Santa Mesa like a heavy blanket, making the asphalt shimmer and the air taste of exhaust and desperation. Luna Alvarez clutched her purple backpack straps, her 11-year-old fingers white with tension as she stood at the bus stop. Trying to make herself invisible, the humiliation still burned in her chest. Miss Peyton Beckford's cold voice echoed in her mind. "Luna, these scholarship documents appear to have irregularities. Perhaps your family needs to reconsider whether this academic environment is truly suitable." The words had been delivered with surgical precision in front of the entire administrative office, where other students waited with their parents, their eyes now avoiding Luna's like she carried something contagious. The whispers had started immediately. "Fake paperwork," someone had hissed. "I heard her mom lied about their income." Luna had felt her cheeks burn as she gathered her things, each rustling paper sounding like thunder in the suddenly quiet hallway. Now, waiting for the bus that would take her back to the cramped apartment where her mother worked double shifts just to keep them afloat. Luna felt the familiar tightness in her throat that came before tears. She pressed her lips together, remembering her father's voice. "Mija, sometimes the world gets loud, but we don't have to shout back. We have our own ways to speak." Without thinking, her hand moved to the purple strap of her backpack. 3 quick squeezes, a pause, 3 more, another pause, 3 final presses. The rhythm her father had taught her when she was 7. When nightmares made her too scared to call out loud. "When your heart screams but your mouth can't," he'd said, "let your hands do the talking." Across the street, Cairo Navarrete felt his blood turn cold. He'd been sweeping the entrance to the community center, the same methodical movements he'd perfected over 3 years of volunteering, when something made him look up. The girl at the bus stop. Purple backpack, small hands moving in a pattern that made his stomach drop. 3 presses, pause, 3 presses, pause, 3 presses. Cairo's hand went instinctively to his wallet, feeling the worn edges of the yellowed paper he'd carried for nearly a decade. Written in faded ink, Miguel Alvarez, and below it, a phone number and 3 small marks, 3 dots in a row, repeated 3 times. The same pattern he'd just watched the girl trace on her backpack strap. The broom slipped from his fingers, clattering on the concrete. Around him, the sounds of Santa Mesa continued, cars honking, children calling, the distant hum of air conditioners working overtime. But Cairo felt suspended in a moment that stretched like taffy. The girl hadn't seen him watching. She stood perfectly still now, her dark hair catching the late afternoon light, her small frame almost swallowed by the purple backpack that seemed too big for her shoulders. Miguel Alvarez. The name on the paper had haunted Cairo for years. The man who'd pulled strings to get him a public defender instead of letting him rot in county lockup. The man who'd talked to him about breaking cycles without breaking people. The man who'd died 6 months later, leaving behind only a phone number, a code, and a debt that Cairo had never figured out how to repay. Until now, the bus wheezed to a stop, its doors sighing open. Luna climbed the steps without looking back, her purple backpack disappearing into the vehicle's dim interior. As the bus pulled away in a cloud of diesel fumes, Cairo stood frozen on the sidewalk, one hand pressed against his wallet, feeling the paper inside like a burning coal. That night, Luna sat at the small kitchen table while her mother, Carmen, heated leftover rice and beans on the stovetop. The apartment smelled of cleaning chemicals. Carmen's work uniform hung by the door, still damp with the scent of industrial disinfectant from the office building she cleaned each night. "How was school, mija?" Carmen asked, not turning from the stove. Her voice carried the careful neutrality of someone afraid to hear the answer. Luna traced patterns on the scratched table surface. "Fine," but her hand found her backpack strap again, and this time, Carmen noticed. She turned, her tired eyes narrowing as she watched her daughter's fingers move in the familiar rhythm. Miguel's rhythm. "Luna," Carmen's voice cracked. "Baby, what happened?" For a moment, Luna's composure wavered. Then she straightened, meeting her mother's gaze with eyes too old for her face. "Nothing I can't handle, Mama. Just like Papa taught me." Outside their window, the lights of Santa Mesa twinkled like earthbound stars, each one representing a family with their own struggles, their own secrets. And somewhere across town, Quiro Navarrete sat on the edge of his narrow bed, holding a yellowed piece of paper up to the light, wondering if fate had finally shown him how to pay his debt. Cairo's studio apartment smelled like instant coffee and old memories. The shoebox sat on his dresser where it had lived for the past 8 years, holding the fragments of a life he'd tried to rebuild. Inside, a photo of his grandmother, faded and soft at the edges, a letter from the public defender Miguel had connected him with, and the paper. He spread it carefully on his small table, smoothing the creases with fingers that still trembled slightly. Miguel Alvarez, written in careful script. Below it, a phone number, and at the bottom, those 3 sets of marks, like Morse code for the desperate. The memory came back in pieces. County lockup, the smell of industrial soap and fear. Miguel had been visiting someone else, but something about Cairo, maybe the fact that he was only 17, maybe the terror in his eyes, had made the older man pause at his cell. "You got people fighting for you, son?" Miguel had asked. When Cairo shook his head, Miguel had nodded once, sharp and decisive. "You do now." 3 weeks later, Cairo had walked out with a public defender, a suspended sentence, and community service. Miguel had been waiting outside the courthouse with a job reference and a simple message. Some debts can only be paid forward. Now, staring at the paper, Cairo thought about the girl at the bus stop, the way she'd held herself so carefully, like someone used to making herself small, the purple backpack that seemed to carry more than just books, and that signal, Miguel's signal. His phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. Gail's name flashed on the screen. "Hermano, you coming to the center tomorrow?" Gail's voice carried the easy warmth that had made him natural at community outreach. "We got that computer class starting up." "Yeah, I'll be there." Cairo hesitated. "Hey, you remember me mentioning Miguel Alvarez?" A pause. "The guy who helped you out back in the day. What about him?" "I need to make some calls." "You still got access to that community phone line. The one at the center, sure, but I'll explain later. Can you be there tonight? Maybe ask Rosalia and Dante to come too." Another pause. Longer this time. Gail knew better than to push when Cairo's voice carried that particular weight. "Everything okay, man?" Cairo looked at the paper again, thinking of small hands pressing 3 times against a purple strap. "Maybe. I hope so." Across town, Gail Mendoza finished his last delivery of the day and sat in his beat-up Honda, engine ticking as it cooled. The customer had been rude. Nothing new there. But Gail had smiled and thanked him anyway, just like he'd learned to do in anger management. Count to 10. Breathe deep. Remember what you're fighting for. He pulled out his phone and called Rosalia first. "Mija, Kiro wants to meet at the center tonight. Something about that Miguel guy. The one who died. Ay, Gail, why are we digging up old ghosts?" "I don't know. But you know Cairo. He doesn't ask for much." Rosalia sighed, the sound carrying years of friendship and hard-won wisdom. "Fine. But if this is about getting back into trouble..." "It's not." Gail said it with more certainty than he felt. "Kiro's different now. We all are. From your mouth to God's ears." Dante was easier to convince. The former hacker turned tech support volunteer lived for mysteries, even small ones. "What time?" was all he asked when Gail explained. 8, and Dante, bring your laptop. At exactly 8 o'clock. The 4 of them sat in the community center's small office, surrounded by the smell of industrial coffee and the gentle hum of fluorescent lights. Kiro had tried calling the number on Miguel's paper 3 times, each attempt going straight to a generic voicemail. "It's connected to the community phone here," Dante explained, fingers flying over his keyboard. "See? The number routes through our system. Has for years." Rosalia leaned forward in her plastic chair. "So Miguel wanted people to be able to reach, what? Us. Or someone like us." Cairo's voice was quiet. People trying to help. On his 4th attempt, Cairo left a message. "This is about Miguel Alvarez. I have something that belongs to him. A paper with a code. 3 marks. 3 times. If this means something to you, I'll be at the Santa Mesa Community Center tomorrow at 6. As they locked up the building, Gail noticed how Cairo kept checking his phone, his usual calm cracked by something none of them could name yet. "You really think someone's going to call?" Rosalia asked. Cairo looked up at the darkening sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear over Santa Mesa. "I think Miguel was smarter than any of us knew, and I think there's a little girl out there who needs our help." The next morning arrived gray and humid. With clouds hanging low over Santa Mesa like a held breath, Cairo had barely slept, the yellowed paper haunting his dreams with its cryptic message and the memory of small hands moving in desperate rhythm. At 6:47 a.m., his phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. Hi, this is about the message you left, about Miguel Alvarez and the 3 marks. The voice was young, female, nervous. I don't know if this is real or some kind of joke, but my dad's name was Miguel Alvarez. He died when I was 7. He taught me a signal, 3 presses for when, a long pause, breathing audible. If you really knew him, meet me at the community center after school. I'll be the one with the purple backpack. Cairo's hand shook as he saved the message and immediately called Gail. She's Miguel's daughter, he said without preamble. The girl from yesterday. She's his daughter. Slow down. Hermano, what girl? At the bus stop, I saw her using the signal, the same code that's on Miguel's paper. She called back. She's coming to the center this afternoon. Gail was quiet for a moment. Processing. You sure about this? Could be a coincidence. 3 presses 3 times, Gail. That's not coincidence, that's family. By 3 p.m., all 4 of them were at the community center, trying to look casual while tension stretched between them like wire. Rosalia had brought fresh coffee and homemade empanadas, her solution to every crisis. Dante sat at the computer, ostensibly updating their database but really running background checks on anyone named Alvarez in the school district. At 3:47, Luna walked through the front door. She was smaller than Cairo had expected, with her father's careful way of observing everything before speaking. The purple backpack seemed to dwarf her thin shoulders, and her dark eyes held the particular wariness of children who'd learned early that adults weren't always safe. You left the message, she asked Cairo, her voice barely above a whisper. Cairo nodded, pulling out the yellowed paper with hands that remained steady through sheer force of will. Your father gave this to me a long time ago. Luna stared at the paper, and for a moment, her carefully constructed composure cracked. He wrote his name like that with the little curl on the A. She looked up at Kiro, and he saw Miguel's eyes staring back at him. What did he do for you? He saved my life. The words came out simple and true, and I've been trying to figure out how to pay him back ever since. Rosalia stepped forward, her maternal instincts activated by the girl's obvious hunger for connection. Mija, are you hungry? We have food. For the first time, Luna smiled. A small, uncertain thing, but real. My mom doesn't get home until 9. She works 2 jobs. Then you'll eat with us, Gail said firmly, and you can tell us what's been going on, why you needed to use your father's signal. As they settled around the small table in the center's kitchen area, Luna began to talk. The words came slowly at first, then faster as she realized these strangers weren't judging her, weren't looking at her with the mixture of pity and suspicion she'd grown used to at school. Miss Beckford, the scholarship documents that suddenly weren't good enough, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the way other students had started avoiding her, as if poverty might be contagious. She said my paperwork had irregularities, Luna explained, unconsciously mimicking Miss Beckford's precise diction. But Mom and I filled everything out together 3 times. We were so careful. Dante looked up from his laptop, something sharp and angry flickering across his features. What kind of irregularities? Income verification, my mom's employment records. They said the numbers didn't match what was in the system. Luna's voice grew smaller. But Mom's been working at the same cleaning company for 2 years, and the restaurant for 8 months. Cairo felt something cold settle in his stomach. Luna, can you tell us exactly what Miss Beckford said? Word for word, as Luna recounted the humiliation in the administrative office. The 4 adults exchanged glances. Gail's jaw tightened. Rosalia's hands clenched into fists around her coffee cup. Dante typed rapidly, his fingers nearly silent on the keys. There's something else, Luna said quietly. Yesterday, after what happened, Miss Beckford pulled me aside. She said maybe it would be better if I didn't make a fuss about the scholarship. That sometimes these things work themselves out if people are patient. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What did you say? Cairo asked, his voice carefully controlled. I said yes, ma'am, because that's what you do when adults tell you things. You say yes. Luna looked around the table at their faces. But then I went to the bus stop and I used Papa's signal because my heart was screaming. And my mouth couldn't. Rosalia reached across the table and took Luna's small hand in both of hers. Mija, you did exactly right. Your Papa taught you well. But I don't understand why any of this is happening, Luna whispered. We didn't do anything wrong. Chiro looked at Miguel's daughter, this brave, careful child who carried her father's wisdom in her small hands, and felt the debt he'd carried for 8 years finally take shape. "No, you didn't do anything wrong," he said quietly. "But I think someone else did, and we're going to find out who." The next morning, Kiro positioned himself across the street from Santa Mesa Elementary with a volunteer badge from the community center and a clipboard that gave him a legitimate reason to observe. The school buzzed with its usual pre-dawn energy. Buses arriving, parents dropping off sleepy children, crossing guards taking their positions like sentries. He spotted Luna immediately. She walked with her head down, the purple backpack a splash of color against her careful invisibility. Other children gave her a wide berth, their whispered conversations dying when she passed. The social isolation was surgical in its precision. At 7:23 a.m., Miss Peyton Beckford emerged from the main building. Cairo had expected someone harder, more obviously villainous. Instead, he saw a woman in her early 40s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She greeted certain parents with effusive warmth while maintaining professional distance from others. The pattern was clear. Families with money received genuine attention. Those without were handled with cool efficiency. When Luna passed within 10 feet of Miss Beckford, something fascinating happened. The woman's entire demeanor shifted. Her smile tightened, her shoulders straightened, and her eyes tracked the girl's movement with the focus of a predator watching prey. "Excuse me?" Kiro approached the main office with his clipboard and his most earnest volunteer expression. "I'm Kiro Navarrete from the Santa Mesa Community Center. We're looking to expand our after-school programs, specifically for scholarship students who might need additional academic support." The secretary, a harried-looking woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, brightened immediately. "Oh, that sounds wonderful. Let me get Miss Beckford. She coordinates all our scholarship programs." When Miss Beckford appeared, Ciro watched her face carefully. Her smile was brilliant and completely artificial. "Mr. Navarrete, how lovely. We're always interested in community partnerships." Her voice carried the kind of warmth that felt calculated. "What specific services were you thinking of providing?" "Tutoring, mostly. Computer literacy. Maybe some college prep workshops for the older kids." Cairo leaned slightly forward, projecting helpful enthusiasm. "We've had some concerns from families in the community about students losing their scholarship eligibility. We'd love to help bridge any gaps before problems become permanent." For just a moment, Miss Beckford's mask slipped. Cairo caught a flicker of something sharp and defensive before the smile returned. "Oh, scholarship eligibility is quite straightforward," she said smoothly. "We simply follow district guidelines. When families fail to maintain proper documentation, or their circumstances change, well..." She spread her hands in a gesture that suggested helpless adherence to bureaucracy. "Of course, I understand these situations can be delicate." Cairo made a note on his clipboard. "We had one family reach out specifically, the Alvarez family. Their daughter Luna seems to be having some difficulties." This time the mask didn't just slip, it cracked. Miss Beckford's smile became rigid, and she clasped her hands together in a way that made her knuckles go white. "The Alvarez situation is complex. Sometimes families overextend themselves, claim resources they don't actually qualify for. It's unfortunate, but we have to protect the integrity of our programs." "Absolutely," Cairo agreed, while every instinct screamed that he was looking at someone who had perfected the art of weaponizing bureaucracy. "Well, perhaps we could start with some general workshops. Get to know the families, build trust." Miss Beckford nodded, but her eyes had gone cold. "I'll have Mrs. Rodriguez send you our partnership requirements. We're very thorough in our vetting process." As Cairo walked away from the school, his phone buzzed with a text from Dante. "Found something. Meet at Center ASAP." An hour later, the four of them crowded around Dante's laptop in the community center's main room. The screen showed a spreadsheet with dozens of names, dates, and dollar amounts. "I pulled the public records for scholarship disbursements over the past 3 years, Dante explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Look at this pattern." His finger traced down the screen. "Scholarship funds allocated. Then, 2 to 6 months later, administrative review resulting in eligibility revision. Every single time. The revision results in reduced funding or complete termination." Gail leaned closer. "How many kids?" 43 families, all low income, all first-generation immigrants or students of color. Dante's jaw worked as he pulled up another screen. "But here's the interesting part. The funds don't get redistributed to other needy families, they just disappear back into the district's general fund." Rosalia made a disgusted sound. "She's stealing from children." It's not technically stealing, Dante said grimly. It's perfectly legal administrative reallocation based on eligibility reviews. The paperwork is impeccable. Cairo thought about Miss Beckford's practiced smile, the way she'd turned Luna's poverty into a moral failing. What about Luna's case specifically? That's where it gets interesting. Dante pulled up another file. Luna's scholarship was worth $3,200 per semester. Her mother's income verification was submitted correctly. I cross-referenced with her employer records. But somehow, the version in the district's system shows different numbers. Someone changed them, Gail said flatly. Someone with administrative access to the database. Dante's eyes glittered with the fervor of a hacker who'd found his target. Someone who knows exactly which families won't have the resources or knowledge to fight back. Cairo stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the street where Luna caught her bus every day. She told that little girl not to make a fuss. Told her these things work themselves out if people are patient. Because she knows most families can't afford lawyers, or don't understand the system well enough to challenge her, Rosalia said, her voice thick with disgust. But she didn't count on Luna's father, Cairo said quietly. She didn't know that Miguel Alvarez had friends, that he'd taught his daughter how to ask for help. He turned back to face the others, and they saw in his expression the same focused determination that had once made him dangerous in very different ways. Time to show Miss Beckford what happens when someone actually fights back. The following afternoon, Luna arrived at the community center with her mother in tow. Carmen Alvarez was exactly what Cairo had expected. Bone-thin from exhaustion, hands roughened by cleaning chemicals, but with her daughter's same careful dignity intact. She clutched a manila folder containing every piece of paperwork related to Luna's scholarship, her knuckles white with the effort of not letting her hands shake. "I don't understand why you want to help us," Carmen said quietly, as Rosalia led them to the small conference room. "We can't pay you anything. We're not asking for payment," Cairo replied, offering her the most comfortable chair. "Your husband helped me once. I'd like to return the favor." Carmen's breath caught. "You knew Miguel. He kept me out of prison when I was 17, probably saved my life." Cairo pulled out the yellowed paper, handling it with the reverence reserved for sacred things. "He gave me this. I never understood what it meant until I saw Luna use the signal." Tears filled Carmen's eyes as she recognized her husband's handwriting. "He said someday Luna might need it. I thought it was just a game. Something to help her feel brave. It worked," Gail said gently. "She found us." Luna sat quietly beside her mother, still wearing the purple backpack like armor. She'd been silent during the entire walk from school, but Cairo could see her taking in every detail of the room, every face, every exit. Miguel's daughter had inherited more than his eyes. "Tell us what happened with the scholarship," Rosalia said, setting down a plate of fresh cookies and a glass of milk for Luna. From the beginning, Carmen's story unfolded with painful precision. The application process that had taken months, the careful documentation of every expense, every income source, the joy when Luna was accepted, the relief of knowing her brilliant daughter would have opportunities Carmen had never dreamed of. "Miss Beckford was so helpful at first," Carmen said, her voice growing smaller. "She walked us through everything, said she wanted to make sure we didn't make any mistakes. She even offered to review our paperwork before we submitted it." Dante looked up from his laptop, where he'd been taking notes. "She reviewed your paperwork." "Yes. She said sometimes families make small errors that can cause big problems later. She wanted to help us avoid that." Cairo and Dante exchanged a look. The setup was becoming clearer. "And everything was fine until 2 months ago," Gail prompted. Carmen nodded. "Luna was doing so well. Honor roll both semesters. Then Miss Beckford called me in for a meeting. Said there were inconsistencies in our financial documentation." "What kind of inconsistencies?" "She showed me papers with numbers that weren't the ones we submitted. Income amounts that were higher than what I actually make. She said it looked like we'd tried to hide assets to qualify for aid we didn't deserve." Luna spoke for the first time since arriving. "I was waiting outside the office. I could hear Miss Beckford through the door. She wasn't talking the same way she talks to other parents." "What do you mean, Mija?" "With the other parents, she talks soft, like she's sorry about bad news. With Mama, she talked hard, like Mama had done something wrong on purpose." Carmen's face flushed with remembered humiliation. "She said there would have to be an investigation, that Luna's enrollment was provisional until it was resolved. She gave me papers to sign. Said they were just acknowledgments that I'd been informed of the review process." "Did you sign them?" Dante asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Of course she's the administrator, I thought. I thought I had to. Rosalia reached across the table and squeezed Carmen's hand. Mija, you didn't do anything wrong. You trusted someone in authority. That's what good people do. Can I see the papers you signed? Dante asked gently. Carmen pulled out her folder with trembling fingers as Dante reviewed the documents. His expression grew increasingly grim. These aren't acknowledgement forms, he said finally. This is a waiver of your right to appeal the scholarship decision. And this one, he held up another paper. This authorizes the district to transfer Luna's scholarship funds to a general educational opportunity fund, pending resolution of the eligibility review. What does that mean? Carmen asked. It means she got you to sign away Luna's scholarship money, Cairo said, his voice deadly quiet. The room fell silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of children playing basketball in the gym. Luna's hand went to her backpack strap, pressing 3 times in the rhythm that had brought them all together. There's something else, Luna said quietly. Yesterday, Miss Beckford asked me to stay after school. She said maybe there was a way to fix this whole thing. Make it go away. Every adult in the room went very still. What kind of way? Rosalia asked, her voice carefully controlled. She said sometimes good students can help with special projects, filing, organizing, stuff like that. After school, on weekends, she said if I was really committed to my education, I'd want to help however I could. Carmen's face went white. Luna, you didn't agree to anything. Did you? No, I told her I needed to ask you first. Luna's voice grew smaller, but she said maybe it would be better if I didn't worry you with the details, that this could be just between us. Cairo stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The others waited while he struggled for control. She's not just stealing money, he said finally, his voice rough. She's grooming vulnerable kids, isolating them from their parents, setting them up to be. He couldn't finish the sentence. We have to stop her, Gail said flatly. How? Carmen asked desperately. She's got all the paperwork, all the authority. Who's going to believe us over her? Dante closed his laptop with a sharp click. Everyone. When we're done building our case. Kiro turned back to face them, and Luna saw something in his eyes that reminded her of her father, a quiet, implacable determination that suggested mountains could be moved if necessary. Luna, he said gently, your papa taught you that signal for when you needed help. Right, she nodded. Well, you used it and help came. Now we're going to teach Miss Beckford what happens when good people fight back. The next 3 days transformed the community center into a makeshift investigative headquarters. Dante's laptop hummed constantly as he cross-referenced databases and public records. Gail made careful rounds through the neighborhood, talking to families in his easy, trustworthy way. Rosalia worked her network of contacts, mothers who gathered at the grocery store, women who shared rides to their cleaning jobs, the invisible community of working people who saw everything. And Cairo watched Miss Beckford. It's a pattern, Dante announced on Thursday afternoon. Surrounded by printouts and empty coffee cups, 43 families over 3 years. Every single case follows the same trajectory. He'd created a timeline that stretched across 3 poster boards taped to the wall. Initial scholarship approval, 6 to 8 weeks of normal enrollment. Then the administrative review begins. What triggers the review? Carmen asked. She'd been coming to the center every day after her morning cleaning shift, bringing Luna with her rather than letting her daughter face school alone. That's what's brilliant about it, Dante said grimly. The reviews are supposedly random, part of routine district oversight. But look at the pattern of which families get selected. His finger traced down a list of names. Single parents, recent immigrants, families where English isn't the first language, people who are least likely to understand the system or have resources to fight it. Luna sat curled in a corner chair, ostensibly doing homework, but actually listening to every word. She'd insisted on hearing everything. It's my life they're messing with, she'd said with her father's stubborn dignity. Here's what makes me sick, Rosalia said, pointing to another section of the timeline. She doesn't just steal their money. She makes them feel grateful for whatever crumbs they get to keep. She'd interviewed 8 families that week, and the stories were heartbreakingly similar. Apologetic phone calls about unfortunate circumstances, suggestions that reduced funding was better than no funding at all, hints that making waves might result in complete termination of benefits. Mrs. Martinez told me she actually thanked Miss Beckford for letting her daughter keep partial aid, Rosalia continued, her voice tight with anger. Said she felt guilty for not catching the errors in her paperwork sooner. Because that's what abusers do, Gail said quietly. They make you think it's your fault, that you deserve what's happening to you. Cairo looked up from the financial documents he'd been studying. The money trail is clean. Everything gets rerouted through legitimate district channels. On paper, it looks like careful fiscal responsibility. But where does it actually go? Carmen asked. That's what we need to figure out. Dante pulled up a new screen. The funds get transferred to something called the Educational Excellence Initiative, but I can't find any record of what that initiative actually does. I can, Luna said quietly from her corner. They all turned to look at her. Miss Beckford talks about it sometimes, when she's meeting with the rich parents. She says it funds enhanced learning opportunities for academically gifted students. What kind of opportunities? Cairo asked. Luna set down her pencil and walked over to the timeline. Private tutoring, test prep classes, college counseling, field trips to fancy universities. She pointed to specific dates on Dante's chart. Right after these families lost their scholarships, Miss Beckford announced new programs for the honors students, the ones whose parents donate to the school. The room fell silent as the full scope of the scheme became clear. She's stealing from poor kids to pay for extras for rich kids, Guile said flatly. And making the poor kids think they lost their aid because they weren't good enough, Rosalia added. Dante was typing furiously. If I can find invoices for these enhanced programs, cross-reference them with scholarship termination dates, you'll have proof of where the money went, Cairo finished. Carmen stood up abruptly, walking to the window. Even if you prove all this, what then? She's still the one with authority. We're still just us. Mama, Luna said quietly. Papa used to say that authority only works if people choose to respect it. And respect has to be earned. Carmen turned to look at her daughter. This 11-year-old girl who spoke with the wisdom of someone twice her age. What would your papa do? She asked. Luna thought for a moment, her hand absently finding her backpack strap. He'd gather the community, he'd make sure everyone knew the truth, and then he'd ask them to choose what kind of place they wanted their children to grow up in. Cairo felt something click into place. Like a key finding the right lock. A public meeting. Force everything into the open. The district has to hold quarterly community forums, Dante said, looking up from his research. It's state law. They can't refuse public comment. When's the next one? Gail asked. 2 weeks from today. Rosalia was already reaching for her phone. I know every mother in this neighborhood. Give me 2 weeks. And I'll make sure that meeting is packed. As they began planning, none of them noticed the car that had been parked across the street for the past 3 days, or the telephoto lens that had been documenting everyone who entered and left the community center. But Miss Peyton Beckford noticed, and she was no longer smiling. The first warning came on a Tuesday morning, slipped under the community center's front door like a whisper in the dark. Some fights aren't worth fighting. Some debts should stay buried. Cairo found the note when he arrived for his morning volunteer shift. The paper crisp and white against the worn linoleum. No signature, no fingerprints, just block letters that might have been written by anyone. He called Gail immediately. Someone's nervous, Gail said, studying the note. Good, means we're on the right track. But Cairo felt the old familiar tightness in his chest, the hyper-awareness that came when invisible lines had been crossed. This isn't about being nervous. This is about control. Throughout the week, the signs multiplied. A black sedan that appeared whenever Luna walked to school, always keeping its distance, but never quite disappearing. Phone calls to the center that hung up when answered. Gail's delivery manager mentioning concerns about his reliability after a parent had complained about inappropriate questions regarding school policies. They can't intimidate us, Rosalia declared on Thursday afternoon, but her hands shook slightly as she sorted through the folders of evidence they'd compiled. Dante had worked 18-hour days, building an airtight case that connected scholarship terminations to enhanced program funding with surgical precision. The documentation was overwhelming. Invoices, bank transfers, email communications obtained through public records requests. Look at this, he said, pointing to his latest discovery. Miss Beckford authorized a $15,000 payment to an educational consulting firm last month. Same week, 3 more families lost their scholarships. What does the consulting firm do? Carmen asked. She'd taken unpaid time off work to help with the investigation, a sacrifice that left dark circles under her eyes but steel in her voice. Private college admissions counseling, for families who can afford to pay $500 an hour. Luna looked up from the homework she was pretending to focus on. The Hendersons hired a college counselor last month, Mrs. Henderson was bragging about it at the school fundraiser. "How old is their kid?" Gail asked. 8. The absurdity of it. Stealing from desperately poor families to fund college prep for elementary school students left them all momentarily speechless. "It's not about the money," Cairo said finally. "It's about power, about making sure the right people get ahead and the wrong people stay down." That evening, as they prepared to leave the center, Cairo noticed the security light in the parking lot was out. He'd made sure it was working that morning, the kind of detail his street-trained paranoia never missed. "Everyone goes home in groups," he announced. "Nobody walks alone until this is over." Carmen started to protest that she couldn't afford to miss her night cleaning shift, but Rosalia cut her off. "My cousin Luis needs extra work. I'll pay him to drive you to and from work until the community meeting. I can't let you—" "Miguel would have done the same for my family," Rosalia said firmly. "Let us honor him." As they locked up the building, Luna tugged on Cairo's sleeve. "The car was at school again today," she said quietly. Miss Beckford came outside and talked to the driver. Cairo's blood chilled. "Did you see who it was?" "No, but Miss Beckford looked happy, like she'd gotten good news." That night, Cairo sat in his small apartment with Miguel's paper spread on the table before him. The note from under the door lay beside it. The contrast between the yellowed hope and the fresh threat stark in the lamplight. His phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. Miguel found out too much. Accidents happen. Cairo stared at the message for a long time, remembering the night 8 years ago when Miguel had died in a hit-and-run that was never solved. A man who'd helped dozens of families navigate the system. A man who'd made enemies in the shadows of bureaucracy. He thought about Luna's brave face, Carmen's exhausted dignity, and the 43 families who'd been systematically robbed of their children's futures. He thought about the debt he'd carried all these years and the girl who'd finally shown him how to pay it. Then he deleted the message and started making calls. "Dante, it's me. How fast can you make backups of everything we've found?" "Give me an hour." "Why?" "Because tomorrow we're going public, all of it. Every piece of evidence, every connection, every family that's been hurt." "What about the meeting next week?" Cairo looked at Miguel's paper one more time, then folded it carefully and put it in his wallet. Next week might be too late. Friday morning, Dante's findings appeared on every community blog, social media page, and neighborhood forum he could access. The headline was simple: "Local school administrator steals from poor students to fund rich kids' programs." By noon, 3 news vans were parked outside Santa Mesa Elementary. Miss Peyton Beckford's perfect smile was nowhere to be seen, and at 2:15 p.m., as Luna sat in her math class, she felt her phone vibrate with a text from Cairo. "The debt is almost paid, mija. Your papa would be proud." The Santa Mesa Elementary Gymnasium had never hosted anything like this before. By 6 p.m., every folding chair was occupied, with more people standing along the walls and spilling into the hallways. The air hummed with nervous energy and suppressed outrage as 300 community members gathered for what was officially called an Educational Policy Information Session. But everyone knew was a reckoning. Luna sat in the front row between her mother and Cairo, the purple backpack at her feet like a talisman. She'd insisted on being there despite Carmen's concerns about subjecting her daughter to what promised to be an ugly confrontation. "I started this," Luna had said that morning. "I need to see how it ends." Miss Beckford entered through a side door with the district superintendent and 2 men in expensive suits who introduced themselves as legal counsel. Her usual perfect composure was intact, but Cairo noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she shuffled her papers. Superintendent Martinez called for order, his voice carrying the authority of someone unaccustomed to challenges. "We appreciate the community's interest in our educational programs. However, I want to be clear that personnel decisions and administrative policies are not subject to public vote." A murmur ran through the crowd, but Gale stood up from his seat halfway back. "With respect, sir, theft of public funds is subject to community concern. No one is accused of theft," one of the lawyers interjected smoothly. "Administrative reallocation of resources based on eligibility reviews is standard procedure." 43 families, Dante called out, his laptop open and connected to the gymnasium's projection system. 3 years, $127,000 in scholarship funds transferred to programs that exclusively serve students from high-income families. The numbers appeared on the wall behind the district officials, each line item clearly labeled with dates, amounts, and beneficiaries. A collective gasp rose from the audience as they saw the scope of the systematic looting. Miss Beckford finally spoke, her voice steady but lacking its usual warmth. These families failed to maintain eligibility requirements. When documentation proves fraudulent, like this documentation, Rosalia stood up, holding a manila folder. Mrs. Martinez's pay stubs, directly from her employer. Notice how the amounts differ from what appear in the district's files. More hands went up around the room. Mrs. Chen, whose son had lost his scholarship in September. Mr. Okafor, whose daughter's aide had been terminated for failing to update address information, despite living in the same apartment for 5 years. Family after family, each with their own story of bureaucratic manipulation and gaslighting. Carmen rose slowly from her seat, and the room fell silent. Her voice was quiet, but carried clearly in the hushed gymnasium. My husband Miguel died 8 years ago before he passed. He worked with families like ours, people who don't always understand how these systems work, who trust authority figures to guide them honestly. Her voice grew stronger. Miguel taught our daughter that when powerful people do wrong things, good people have to speak up, even when they're scared. She gestured to Luna, who stood up beside her mother, her small frame dwarfed by the crowd, but her voice clear and unwavering. Miss Beckford told me not to make a fuss, said these things work themselves out if you're patient. Luna's hand went to her backpack strap, and she pressed 3 times, the signal her father had taught her, now witnessed by hundreds of people. But my papa taught me this signal for when patience isn't enough, when your heart screams and your mouth can't. A woman in the 3rd row began crying quietly. Then another. The sound spread through the gymnasium like ripples on water as parent after parent recognized their own children's struggles. In Luna's words, Miss Beckford stood up, her composure finally cracking. This is highly inappropriate. This child has been coached to make inflammatory statements. The only coaching she received, Cairo said, his voice cutting through her protests like a blade, was from a father who wanted to make sure she could ask for help when she needed it. He pulled out Miguel's yellowed paper and held it up for everyone to see. Miguel Alvarez saved my life when I was 17 years old, kept me out of prison, helped me find work, taught me about paying debts forward instead of back. He died before I could thank him properly, but his daughter just showed me how. The emotion in his voice was raw, genuine, and it resonated through the crowd like a tuning fork struck against stone. Superintendent Martinez cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the narrative. While these concerns deserve investigation, procedural changes require proper channels. The proper channel, said a new voice from the back of the room, is the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force. Special Agent Sarah Chen walked down the center aisle, her badge clearly visible. We've been monitoring this situation for the past week, based on evidence provided by community members. We've opened a formal investigation into fraudulent use of federal education funds. The gymnasium erupted. Miss Beckford sank into her chair, her face ashen. The district lawyers huddled in urgent whispered consultation. Parents who'd stayed silent for years suddenly found their voices, sharing stories of intimidation and manipulation. Luna remained standing as chaos swirled around her, one small hand still pressed against her purple backpack strap. Ciro leaned down to whisper in her ear, "Your papa's debt is paid, Mija. Now we start building something better." As the meeting dissolved into excited planning for reform committees and oversight groups, Luna looked up at Cairo with her father's steady eyes. "This wasn't just about the money, was it?" she asked. "No," he said quietly. "It was about making sure good people don't have to fight alone anymore." 3 months later, the Santa Mesa Community Center had transformed from a quiet volunteer operation into the beating heart of neighborhood change. The small conference room where Luna had first told her story now bustled with activity. GED classes, citizenship test prep, and a new program called Know Your Rights that Cairo had designed specifically for families navigating the education system. Luna arrived every day after school, her purple backpack traded for a newer blue one, but the 3-press signal remained. It had become something different now, not a cry for help, but a reminder that help was always available. 17 families got their scholarships reinstated, Dante announced during their weekly planning meeting. Reading from his laptop screen, full retroactive funding. The district's also implementing new oversight procedures to prevent future administrative abuse. Miss Beckford had resigned quietly rather than face criminal charges, accepting a plea agreement that included restitution payments and a permanent ban from educational employment. The ripple effects had spread far beyond Santa Mesa. Other districts were reviewing their scholarship programs, and the state was drafting new transparency requirements for educational funding. Carmen had been promoted to supervisor at the cleaning company, her careful attention to detail finally recognized and rewarded. She still worked hard, but no longer carried the exhausted desperation that had defined her life for so long. Sometimes she would stop by the center after work, just to watch Luna help other children with their homework, marveling at how her daughter had found her voice. "Mrs. Rodriguez wants to start a parent advocacy group," Rosalia reported, consulting her ever-present notebook. "She said too many families still don't know what questions to ask when something doesn't seem right." Gael nodded approvingly. "Fear only works when people feel isolated. Build community. Build courage." As the meeting wound down, Cairo found himself watching Luna work with a younger student, a shy 6-year-old whose mother was worried about kindergarten reading assessments. Luna's patience was infinite, her encouragement genuine, and her instinct for when to push and when to comfort remarkably mature. "She's going to be something special," Dante said quietly, following Cairo's gaze. "She already is," Cairo replied. "She just needed people to see it." That evening, as the center emptied out and the cleaning crew arrived, including Carmen, who'd insisted on keeping her job there even after her promotion elsewhere, Ciro sat alone in the main room with a small package in his hands. Inside was a new photograph, Luna and Carmen at the scholarship restoration ceremony, beaming as the superintendent personally apologized and handed Luna a check for her reinstated funds. Beside it was a letter from Miguel's old friend at Legal Aid, thanking Cairo for carrying on Miguel's work and officially establishing the Miguel Alvarez Education Justice Fund. But the real treasure was the small card Luna had made herself. On the front, drawn in careful colored pencil, was a purple backpack with a hand pressing the strap 3 times. Inside, in her neat 11-year-old handwriting, "For Cairo. Thank you for hearing Papa's signal. The debt is paid, but the friendship is forever." Cairo felt tears blur his vision as he placed the card next to Miguel's yellowed paper in the small frame on his desk. 2 pieces of paper, 8 years apart, connecting a desperate teenager to a brave little girl through the kind of man who believed in paying kindness forward. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw the news about Santa Mesa. Similar situation in Riverside. Could use guidance." Cairo stared at the message, thinking about the dozens of districts across the state, the hundreds of families who might be facing the same systematic exploitation that had targeted Luna. He thought about Miguel's dream of breaking cycles without breaking people, and about the 11-year-old girl who'd turned a cry for help into a rallying cry for justice. He typed back, "Community center address is attached. Ask for Luna. She'll teach you the signal." As he prepared to lock up the center, Cairo paused at the new mural that covered the back wall, a collaboration between Luna and a local artist that depicted hands of all colors reaching toward each other against a backdrop of purple backpacks. At the center, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, was a small pattern of 3 pressed fingerprints, repeating 3 times. The signal that had started as one father's gift to his daughter had become something larger, a symbol of community, resistance, and the unshakable belief that no child should have to face injustice alone. Outside, the lights of Santa Mesa twinkled in the evening air, each one representing a family that now knew the power of speaking up, standing together, and never accepting that authority automatically equals honesty. And in a small apartment across town, Luna Alvarez did her homework at a kitchen table, occasionally glancing at the framed photo of her father that sat beside her books. Sometimes, when math problems got particularly frustrating, she would press her pencil against the desk 3 times, remembering his voice, "When your heart screams, and your mouth can't, let your hands do the talking." But now she knew something Miguel had only hoped for, that when good people listen, those quiet signals can change the world. 1 year after the gymnasium confrontation that changed everything, Luna stood before a packed auditorium at the state education conference, a 14-year-old girl whose voice no longer trembled when facing crowds. The purple backpack had been retired to a place of honor on her bedroom shelf, but she still carried its lesson with her everywhere. "My name is Luna Alvarez," she began, her words carrying clearly through the microphone. 3 years ago, I was just another scholarship kid who thought keeping quiet was the same thing as being good. Today, I'm here to tell you why that's the most dangerous lesson we can teach our children." In the audience, Ciro sat beside Carmen, both of them watching with pride as Luna commanded the attention of educators, policymakers, and advocates from across the state. The girl who'd once pressed 3 times on her backpack strap in silent desperation was now teaching others about the power of speaking up. "The signal my father taught me wasn't just about asking for help," Luna continued. "It was about believing I deserved help. about understanding that when systems fail children, it's never the children's fault. The Santa Mesa Community Center had become a model program. Replicated in 12 districts across California, the Miguel Alvarez Education Justice Fund provided grants for families to challenge administrative decisions and had prevented an estimated $400,000 in fraudulent scholarship terminations. More importantly, it had created a network of families who knew their rights and weren't afraid to exercise them. Dante, now working part-time for the state auditor's office while maintaining his volunteer position at the center, had developed a digital toolkit that allowed parents to track their children's funding in real time. His motto, "Transparency is the best disinfectant," had been adopted by oversight committees statewide. Gail had become the center's official community liaison, his natural ability to connect with people making him invaluable for building trust between institutions and the families they served. His delivery route now included regular stops at schools, where he'd become an unofficial early warning system for administrative problems. Rosalia ran the parent education program with the efficiency of a general and the heart of a grandmother, teaching families that respectful questioning wasn't the same as disrespect for authority. Her Tuesday evening workshops regularly filled beyond capacity, with waiting lists that stretched for months. As Luna concluded her presentation to thunderous applause, Cairo felt a familiar pressure in his chest, but this time it was joy, not anxiety. The debt that had haunted him for over a decade was more than paid. It had multiplied into something Miguel could never have imagined. After the conference, the core group gathered for dinner at their usual spot, a small Mexican restaurant where the owner still remembered Miguel and always saved their favorite table. Luna, now a confident 8th grader with colleges already recruiting her, sat between her mother and Cairo, her presence a bridge between past and future. "I got a call today," Carmen announced during dessert. "The Department of Education wants me to join their Family Advocacy Advisory Board." "Take it," Gail said immediately. "You'll be the voice of every parent who's ever felt powerless in a principal's office." Carmen smiled, but her eyes held uncertainty. "I don't have a college degree. I clean offices for a living." "You raised a daughter who changed the world," Rosalia said firmly. "What other credentials do you need?" Luna reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand. "Besides, you won't be alone. We're all connected now, remember? Like Papa always said, when good people stand together, impossible things become inevitable." Later, as they prepared to leave the restaurant, Luna pulled Cairo aside. "I want to ask you something," she said quietly. "This fall, when I start high school, I want to keep volunteering at the center, but I also want to do something new." "What's that?" "I want to learn about the system Papa was working on before he died, the one that would help families before they get in trouble, not just after." Cairo felt Miguel's presence so strongly, it took his breath away. "Your father had some ideas about preventive advocacy, early intervention programs. I still have his notes. Could you teach me, not because of any debt, but because I think this is what I'm supposed to do, who I'm supposed to be?" Looking at Luna, this remarkable young woman who'd inherited her father's passion for justice and her mother's quiet strength, Cairo realized that some debts don't get paid off. They get transformed into something larger, something that continues growing long after the original obligation is forgotten. "I'd be honored," he said simply, as they walked back to the community center in the warm evening air. Luna's hand unconsciously went to the strap of her school bag. 3 presses, quick and light, but now it was habit rather than desperation, a reminder of where she'd come from and a promise of where she was going. Behind them, the lights of the city sparkled like scattered diamonds, each one representing a family, a story, a potential that deserved protection. And in the distance, the neon sign of the Santa Mesa Community Center glowed steadily, a beacon for anyone who needed to know that help was always available. You just had to know the signal. The purple backpack sat safely in Luna's room, a relic of the scared little girl who'd been brave enough to ask for help. But its legacy lived on in the dozens of children who now knew that silence wasn't safety, that questioning authority wasn't disrespect, and that sometimes the smallest gestures could echo across generations. Miguel Alvarez had taught his daughter to signal for help when words failed her, but Luna had learned something even more powerful: how to teach others that they were never truly alone, that community was stronger than corruption, and that every voice mattered, no matter how small. As they reached the center, Cairo looked up at the mural Luna had helped create, hands reaching toward each other, purple backpacks transforming into wings, and at the center, barely visible unless you knew to look, those 3 small fingerprints, pressed in eternal repetition. Your father would be so proud, he told her. Luna smiled, her eyes bright with plans for the future. I know. I can feel him sometimes, when I'm helping other kids. Like he's still here, still fighting for families who need someone in their corner. He is, Kiro said quietly. Through you, through all of us. Some debts don't end. They just keep growing, touching more lives, creating more hope. And as they entered the center together, ready to begin planning the next day's work, Luna's signal echoed silently through the halls. 3 presses of hope, repeated 3 times. A rhythm of resilience that would continue long after they were gone. What an incredible journey from fear to empowerment. Luna's courage reminds us that every voice matters, especially when we stand together. Have you ever witnessed someone find their voice when they thought no one was listening? Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create ripples that change entire communities, just like how one signal connected a scared girl to people who cared. Would you like another story?